Last Bronx 東京番外地
Last Bronx was a 3D fighting game released by Sega to the arcades, PC, Saturn and later emulated for the PlayStation 2. Having been introduced to the arcades in June 1996, it would become part of a new generation of 3D weapon-based fighting games. Together with Tamsoft's Battle Arena Toshinden released in 1994 and Namco's Soul Edge, Soul Blade here in the West and first released in the arcades in 1995 with its version 1 variant, the battle for market share was truly on, especially when it came to the home conversions. Known as Last Bronx Tokyo Bangaichi, it was created on Sega's Model 2 arcade board, specifically Sega's Model 2B, by AM3, one of Sega's internal arcade research and development divisions and the folks responsible for the likes of Max TT. The only real concern was that they weren't particularly well known for their fighting games, apart from Virtual on Cyber Troopers, which like Max TT was first introduced to the arcades a year earlier in 1995. When it came to Sega's divisions, AM2 ruled the roost via their established fighting games, where they dominated thanks to their Virtual Fighter and Fighting Viper series and later Fighters Megamix, but also thanks to games like Virtual Cop and Daytona USA. Little it seemed was expected from AM3's beat-em-up offering. Yet because of Battle Arena Toshinden, which is credited as having been the first true three-dimensional fighting game due to the player's ability to sidestep, weapon-based beat-em-ups were certain to become a surefire hit, and so Last Bronx together with Soul Blade, which by the way were two of the first motion-captured weapon-based beat-em-ups ever created, was expected to become one of the killer titles in that department.
No problem!
Where it differed from the competition was in its contemporary setting as well as its effort to steer clear of AM2's martial arts orientated Virtual Fighter series, where the designers instead decided to take the game to the streets of Tokyo, making it quite distinct from the martial arts based Battle Arena Toshinden and Soul Edge as well. But on top of this there was always some rivalry between Sega's divisions, and so AM3 attempted to break new ground by featuring stages that were inspired by actual locations in Tokyo, as well as characters displaying the real-world mid-90s fashion of Japanese teenagers of the time. AM3 would also manage to squeeze polygons for the backgrounds from the aging Model 2, while maintaining a respectable frame rate, something not even the mighty Virtual Fighter 2 had managed to achieve, and even though Sega, together with Lockheed Martin, were creating the Model 3 arcade board at around the same time. And even though Last Bronx used Virtual Fighter's standard 3-button control setup, punch, guard and kick, it featured very different mechanics to that game due to its focus on floating combo attacks. The Model 2 version also featured weapon tracer effects, 3D backgrounds, real-time shadows and Virtual Fighter 2's high resolution mode, all running at a smooth 60 frames per second. In 1997, Sega dropped the Tokyo Bangaichi subheading and released the game simply as Last Bronx on the Sega Saturn. Now in Japan, the game was released on 2 discs, one containing the main game while the other featured Kyoshitsu, a kind of classroom, and a dojo training center. Because Sega couldn't be bothered to translate the second disc, a bare-bones version of the training mode was included in the Western release. Having said that, the Saturn had some fun modes including the mandatory arcade, versus, time attack, survival and free practice modes, as well as an aerial combo practice mode, movie mode, watch mode, portrait mode and Saturn mode. The Saturn mode was basically a kind of story mode which detailed the exciting and thought-provoking relationships of the various combatants, so basically along the lines of "My name is Zaimoko, I'm 26 years old, the end." And this was done via brief interactions before they beat the living crap out of each other, and also featured some lovely anime cutscenes as well. The Saturn version did suffer from graphical glitches though, but considering they managed to retain both the frame rate and Virtual Fighter 2's high resolution mode, they did a bloody good job. Last Bronx sadly didn't reach the potential that many thought it would, mainly due to the competition, though we need to get one thing straight, it was hugely popular in Japan, eventually spawning comic books, tournaments and even a VHS documentary on motion capturing. Over here in the West, the Saturn was fast failing, and frankly there wasn't enough cash pumped into promoting it as a result. On top of this, it was released for the consoles in the US and Europe in late '97, many months after Soul Blade had already hit the shelves, and without the publicity and hype that game received as well. Some cite other problems apart from these. One issue was that the stages being inspired by real-world locations were simply lost on those who weren't familiar with them in the first place, which was one of the main attractions for Japanese gamers who recognised the Tokyo-inspired backdrops immediately. Because of this, there were some who just didn't truly understand the joys of smacking someone in the face with a massive hammer on a Tokyo cross street. Others felt it lacked the appeal, vitality, vibrancy, and character of other offerings, and apart from its sublime sense of speed, it lacked personality. But to cap it all off, teenage boys were left feeling somewhat castrated by the revelation that the story of Nagi, who was some hot feminist lesbian chick, was massively toned down for the Western release, and this in parts was thanks to organisations like the British Board of Film Classification, or BBFC, though I prefer bloody bullshit who even censored nunchucks for martial arts films and anything else exciting that was worth watching. And instead of storylines like,
hold on, yeah, hold on. Hello?
"Hi, I'm Nagi. Men feel positively weak at the prospect of going the rounds with me, but I've only got eyes for Yoko. I so badly want her to jump up and down hard for me. Just one last time, that gorgeous, sexy little Gamers over here were treated with stories like,
hold on, yeah, hold on.
"Hi, my name's Nagi. My father's a powerful business leader, so there. I also hate men. My father's..."
Hello? Goodbye. Yeah, carry on.
A little history lesson, if you will. Once upon a time, the retards over at the BBFC took issue with kids making nunchucks after watching Bruce Lee films in the 1970s, and so as ridiculous as this sounds, decided to ban any reference to them in every form of entertainment here in the UK. Sadly, this also meant that Europe too had to endure this ordeal, seeing as they were all part of the wonderful EU. In games where nunchucks were featured in the original, they were usually either cut or replaced by a 3-piece staff, as seen here in Soul Blade. Yeah, like that's totally different. The European version of Last Bronx was one of the only games to avoid this censorship, due to rumours that Sega had put pressure on the BBFC and had promoted it based on its realistic Tokyo-inspired setting. No, I couldn't possibly have made that one up, believe me. Some were upset by the distinct lack of unlockable characters, the only exception being Red Eye, and because it wasn't seen as a staple of the established canon of Sega fighting games, which, as mentioned earlier, always came from AM2. To their credit though, Last Bronx was part of a list of titles that would, in hindsight, showcase the creative genius of Sega's in-house fraternity, as it was just one of many different types of 3D fighting game that they would go on to develop for the Sega Saturn. For those wanting an in-depth fighting experience, there was Virtual Fighter 2. For those wanting to let their hair down or to get candy undressed, they had Fighting Vipers. For a mixture of both, there was Fighters Megamix. For a weapon-based alternative, they could of course turn to Last Bronx, and for mech-loving fanboys interested in robots with dresses, they had Virtual On Cyber Troopers. And while it was a very risky manoeuvre for Sega to have such a wide range of beat-em-ups, they at least tried to cater for everyone. A risk no other company was as willing, though as some might say as stupid, to take, so credit to Sega for that. Last Bronx then, good game, while certainly not the best on the Saturn, it has its fans. This is Toops from Team CGS, until next time I'll see you later, goodbye.
Game over.